If you have ever lived in White Bluff, you have probably learned this lesson. You have had your hopes raised and then dashed cruelly. Let's see if I've gotten this right. Have you heard about the new Sonic that's coming to town? Every single time that a piece of commercial property on 47 or 70 is sold, do you hear the same rumor? That's where the Sonic is going. The first 4 or 5 years that Leslie and I lived in White Bluff, we would hear that and we would get so excited because a cherry vanilla Dr. Pepper or a cherry limeade sounded like the best thing in the world. And you know what happened every single time? They didn't build the Sonic. In fact, my guess is if this video is found in some archaeological dig site in the year 3240, in the ruins of what was once Tennessee, they're going to look in White Bluff and they're going to say that's where the Sonic was supposed to go. I think that's how it's going to happen. But you know, the funny thing is, every time I heard somebody told me with great authority, hey, that's where the Sonic's going. I heard that so-and-so bought this property and so-and-so sold this property and they're going to start construction any day now. And it never happened. Now, that was disappointing, but it wasn't a big change, I guess. It wasn't anything terribly surprising once you got used to it. The reason I tell you that little story to start this video session is it's an illustration of something that we have a bigger problem with as a society as a whole. What people told me when they told me about the Sonic wasn't true. They repeated something that they believed, and they didn't tell me that there was a Sonic just to get my hopes up, to hurt my feelings when it didn't show up. After all, I have Carl's Perfect Pig to fall back on, so everything was really all right in the end. But they repeated something that they believed to be true. And in a small town, you know how that goes. The story repeats, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's mostly harmless when you think that it's a Sonic coming into town, but it's pretty dangerous when it's a rumor about the character of another person in town. Maybe I'm talking about gossip. Maybe I'm not just talking about gossip. Maybe I'm talking about the things that we share on Facebook about the people who disagree with us politically. Maybe I'm talking about the things we write in books or say in Bible classes about people who go to a different kind of church than we do. All of these things boil down to one issue. What the world needs now is truth. The last 2 sessions we have talked about our ability to listen and our ability to love. And this week I want us to dig into this idea. The world needs better truth tellers, and not just people who are saying, I tell the truth, but better ability to detect what the truth is and a better willingness to make sure we don't repeat things that aren't true. Truth has been tricky these days. In fact, to prove the point for me, here's what I want you to do. I want you to grab your phone and I want you to set a 60-second timer. And what I want you to do in that 60 seconds is come up with a list of as many disputed ideas that you can come up with. Whether it is climate change or the coronavirus or whatever you want, 60 seconds, I want you to see how many things that we're not sure what the truth is anymore. I want to see how many of those things you can come up with in just 1 minute. I bet you can get at least 20. Pause the video, set a 60-second timer, and go for it. How did you do? I bet you got at least 5. Is the Earth round or flat? I'm pretty sure it's round. Can you imagine the sort of conspiracy it would take for that not to be true? But I have some friends who may or may not see this video who believe otherwise. Now, I'm not going to go any further than that because if I start telling you my opinions about all of these things, at some point you're going to turn off the video because you say he's wrong about whatever, and you're going to quit listening to me because you think that I've gotten it wrong. There are so many conflicts right now that this would be funny if it weren't tragic. There's a great Mark Twain quote from 1919. Maybe you've heard it. A lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth can get its boots on. Too bad we're not even sure the world's round for that quote. The quote's good. Even more so in the age of 24-hour news and smartphones and fact checkers. But you know what my favorite part about this 1919 quote by Mark Twain is? It's not true. You know how I know it's not true? Mark Twain died in 1910. So I'm fairly confident he didn't say it in 1919. Okay, well maybe he said it earlier. Well, that's cute. Now, I did literally 5 minutes of research on this, okay? So maybe I got something wrong here, but here is the best that I can find. It's not in any of his surviving books. There is no newspaper article, no newspaper clipping, no transcript of a speech that he gave. Nothing actually says Mark Twain said this at this place in this time. In fact, there's an entirely different history. In 1710, Jonathan Swift said, "Falsehood flies and the truth comes limping on after it." If you search through that phrase throughout history, you'll find that about every 20 years it gets attributed to a new author and it gets tweaked just a little bit every time it gets quoted. Flies turns into flies around the world, and you see how the quote moves. It's been attributed to a Chinese proverb, to Thomas Jefferson, to Charles Spurgeon, to FDR, and of course to Winston Churchill. Now, is there a great controversy about who gets the credit for this quote? Does it really matter who said it, Spurgeon or Twain? Of course it doesn't. But here's what I'm trying to say. The irony is that in a quote about truth, we don't even get that right. And look how many other places we have that problem in our world. I've used the Mark Twain quote in a class at Burns. In fact, I found it when I was going through my notes. We did a study on, guess what, truth. And I used that quote in a class on Wednesday about truth in the year 2017. And I used it wrong. Now, did I cost anybody their soul that day? Probably not from that, at least. But in that moment, I mishandled truth. And ironically, I did what I said I was trying not to do. Will it happen again? Certainly. Will you do the same thing? Absolutely. But here's what I believe. Truth is really important because Jesus is truth. Jesus himself says, "I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Jesus says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And when Jesus said that in John's Gospel, I don't think he was saying, "You will know a list of propositions." I think he was acting more like he did in the rest of his ministry. "You will know me, and I will set you free." How do I know that? Later on, he says, "Whom the Son sets free is free indeed." The Son is truth. Now, here's the point I'm trying to make. If we're Jesus people, we're going to be truth people. That's the Christian proposition. But let me go at this from the other angle entirely. Our world is so confused. We're not sure what to do about economy or healthcare or virus or this or that or any of this stuff. And one of the biggest problems we have is we're not sure what's true anymore. We have conspiracy theories, we have gossip, we have lies repeated, and it's a big problem. Here is a definition. I want you to see if you can match the definition to the word. Here's the definition from Oxford's Concise English Dictionary. Casual conversation or unsubstantiated reports about other people. I'll read it again. Casual conversation or unsubstantiated reports about other people. What word is defined by that phrase? My knee-jerk reaction, my quick answer is to say that social media is defined by that phrase, but that's not quite right. The word that the Oxford Concise English Dictionary uses for that definition is the word gossip. Now, when you think about gossip, I think you usually think about people whispering about other people and how they did something bad or embarrassing or shameful. But repeating unsubstantiated reports, carrying falsehoods, even with good intent, is just a type of gossip. So with that definition in mind, I want you to look at some Bible verses about gossip and see how they change and how they might sound different to you in the Facebook era. Here's the gossip verses. Come back when you're done. Proverbs 26:20 through 22. For lack of wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, quarreling ceases. How would your life be different if there was a moment where somebody didn't repeat a story? How would our communities look different if every time a Republican did something foolish, the Democrats didn't go repeat it and exaggerate, and vice versa to the Democrats? How would our world look different if we had more discourse that was based on truth rather than hearsay? This series is called What the World Needs Now, and I am really convinced that the world needs less gossip and more truth. How many times have you heard some version of the Sonic story told to you by somebody who 100% believes it? Friends, a few weeks ago I heard stories where I discovered a pile of bricks and that meant they were about to riot in the Dollar General in Dixon. And you know, the funny thing was, all of those stories turned out to be false. What did repeating those things do? Several things. One, it undermined our credibility. If I get the Sonic story wrong, why should you believe that I get the eternity story right? It undermines my credibility when I repeat these things. Two, it fuels division. Number three, it fuels fear. There are real consequences to repeating things that aren't true. I want to close with a practical exercise for you. And the idea for this comes from Ephesians 4:15. It's one of our motto verses, speaking truth in love. Those things are married concepts. They're really important. This exercise will take as much time as you're willing to give it, and it's a little bit more of a school exercise than a church exercise, but the Bible teaches people how to live daily life regularly, and if you get this right, it will help you understand life better. It'll help you understand Scripture better. There are two websites, and I'll put them on the screen for you. The first is called yourlogicalfallacyis.com. The second is yourbias.is. Yeah, I'll put those links on the page for you. These two sites explain for school children some of the most common ways that people mess up the search for truth: logical fallacies and cognitive biases. Logical fallacies are thinking errors. They're like saying 2 plus 2 equals 0. Now, I'm not real good at math, but I'm pretty sure 2 plus 2 still equals 4. Well, how would 2 plus 2 equal 0? Well, 2 plus 2 equals 0 if you make one additional stroke of your pen, and you turn the minus into the plus. 2 minus 2 is 0. In our thinking, sometimes we make the same sorts of mistakes. When I am criticizing someone else's belief, sometimes I set up a straw man. That's just a fancy way of saying, rather than arguing with the thing that they're actually saying, I set up a really dumb version of the thing that they're saying and tear it down. That's a mistake. It's unfair, it's unkind, and it's untrue. There are all sorts of other ways that we do this. Sometimes we use the authority fallacy. What that means is some smart person said it, so it must be true. The president said it, therefore it must be true. Well, that's not true, no matter who's in office. Anyone can be mistaken. So this website, yourfallacyis.com, will actually show you about 25 of these fallacies. I'd like you to look through those lists and make sure that you understand what they are. And if you can, I want you to share some examples of the ones that are most common. The second website, yourbias.is, talks about cognitive biases. These are the biases in our thinking. They're the lenses that we look through. Let me show you my favorite one. If you've bought a car recently, this one will ring a bell. It's called the anchoring bias. The car dealer is going to tell you that the MSRP for this car is $79,999. Now, there's actually two biases in here. By doing the 99 thing, they're avoiding using the $80,000, which seems a lot higher than the $70,000. That's part one. That's not the one I'm talking about. The anchoring bias, why do they tell you that the car costs $79,999? Does anybody ever pay that for the car? Of course not. If you've ever listened to a car ad, they all talk about how they will sell it for thousands below MSRP. In fact, some of them even talk about how they'll sell it below invoice, which is also another made-up number. Well, why do they do that? Well, if they tell you that the car costs 80 grand and they sell it to you for 40, your brain just says, wow, I got a great deal. I got this car for half off. You didn't actually get the car for half off. You got it for the same thing they sell it to for everyone, but you felt like you got a great deal because your brain remembers the first number that you hear and holds on to it. It anchors that number. It's just a way that human beings think. Now, use this power for good, not for evil. So if you just listed a car on Facebook Marketplace, don't put in a really stupid high price just to trick them in negotiations. This is part of how the human brain works. And if you understand these biases in your thinking, it makes you a better thinker. And a friend once told me that thinking might be one of the most spiritual things that we do. After all, God gave us brains. Doesn't He expect us to use them? So the next time somebody tells me that the Sonic is about to come to White Bluff, I'm going to ask to see the building permit. and I'm going to ask for the names of who is actually investing in it. And I'm going to go to the Sonic website, and I'm going to click on the little button that says Find a Sonic, and I'm going to see if there's a new franchise opening near me. Because I can get truth better that way than I can listening to so-and-so who heard so-and-so who heard so-and-so who heard so-and-so say that that's what's happening. How much better would our world be if we'd go straight to the source, straight to truth, straight to Jesus? So your last exercise this week is I want you to look at those two websites, and I want you to think about the two ways we mess up our thinking, the cognitive biases, the logical fallacies, and I want you to look for ones that you've seen in the last week, and I want you to share them with your group to see if that can't help us become better thinkers, because if we're better thinkers, it might just help us be better Jesus followers too.